Hey guys and welcome back to my channel. This is first part of what if Luffy ate the storm fruit and was the captain of the Storm Pirates. Before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe for more amazing content, and also go and support the author, link in description. Not all treasure is silver and gold, mate. It was a fine day under the bright sun. He closed his eyes as he felt the warmth of its brilliant rays. The sea breeze was slowly blowing in his face, providing him with a relaxed feeling in his last moments. The skies were the perfect hue, light blue in color. He opened his eyes and stared at the seagulls flopping their wings on the horizon, flying and enjoying their freedom. Every movement he made was watched under scrutiny by the bystanders in the plaza. People from all around the globe were present in this whole fiasco the world government has organized. The only thing heard was his footsteps as he slowly walked to his demise. Everyone was too focused on him to say anything. He didn't mind the people, just focusing on the scenery laid right in front of his eyes. After all, it has been years since he was last here. It was all too good for an execution. He's going to die today. He was never afraid of dying. Ever since he started his piracy life, he knew someday he was going to face death. A man should never give up on his dreams, even if it means death. But unlike others, he will die with his head held up high, showing dignity. He had fulfilled his dreams, but he had been too early. The fate or the sickness had made sure of that, who knew? He even chose the way of how he will die, getting executed in his hometown. He liked being the center of attention, especially now that he had something significant to say for the people present. He has been prepared for it for months. There was no point in turning back. He always liked to live his life without any regrets. But still, he will die with one goal: Roger, the man who acquired everything, wealth, fame, and power. The man who is now known as the King of the Pirates was facing his execution. After surrendering himself to the Marines, they decided to do it in this place. Logatown. It was his birthplace. The town where he was born and, ironically, the place where he will face death. Nostalgia struck the Pirate King hard. He remembered his childhood here. This place was the last island on East Blue before the Red Line. A lot of ships always docked here for supplies. Let it be merchants, crusaders, marines or pirates. He always wanted to talk to people about their adventures. That was what inspired him to be a pirate. The sea just seemed to be a place where he can attain freedom. And he was glad that before he will die, he managed to succeed in attaining freedom. Even when facing execution, Roger still carried an air of respect and fear among the people. Most people only gathered, for one thing, to know where his treasure is. Others just liked the idea of seeing the most infamous pirate in history to have his head chopped up. Among the crowds, Roger saw some familiar faces. Some of his crew members were here to witness it. Most notably for him, two of his apprentices, Shanks and Buggy. He made a promise with them to not cry, but it was obviously something that they cannot fulfill. Both of the boys had tears falling from their eyes like waterfalls. Amongst others were a man with sunglasses on his face, a face grinning. A man with a sword like a cross. A dragon was watching quietly. A crocodile was watching with interest. Many others. He was on top of the platform now, seeing every part of Logatown. His black eyes were focused more on the sky rather than below, where he could finally hear the people's whisper buzzing, growing into volume as seconds passed by. Have you got any last words? Roger turned to him and grinned widely. He held his handcuffs. Can you please remove this? It's bothering me. I cannot do that. The guard snapped. Why would I run away now? Roger asked, scoffing. He continues to walk a few meters before sitting in the center of the platform. It was taking too long. The two guards moved their spears, ready to strike him any second now. The once small whispers grew to be loud yellings. The atmosphere was tense as they stared atop of the platform with wide eyes. This was a historical moment. The death of the Pirate King in front of them. It was not something you experienced twice in your life. And all of a sudden, the screamings broke. A man brave enough in the crowd started yelling. Pirate King, what did you do to your treasure? It's somewhere in the Grand Line, isn't it? The greatest treasure in the world. Shut up. The guard barked angrily below. The man did not mind him and continued. One piece. At that moment, everyone tensed up. Humans are greedy creatures, never satisfied with anything in life and would always crave for more. They always ran after something that they'll never be able to grasp. Roger grinned. His treasure would turn the world upside down. The laughter started erupting from Roger's mouth. That laugh. It was exactly the same laugh he expressed when he was on Laugh Tale. Too bad, though, he did not have the time to tell the story of Joy Boy. My treasure. Roger flashed a toothy grin, ear to ear. Shut up. The guard shouted as he moved his spear further closer to him. If you want it, all you have it. Go look for it. I left it all in that place. That day Galdi. Roger died, and he started the new pirate era. Years later. Luffy, what do you think you're doing up there? Shanks loudly questioned to the 7-year-old child that was standing on his ship's figurehead. I'm gonna make everyone take me seriously around here. Luffy exclaimed with a furrowed brow. Oh. And how will you do that? Shanks asked curiously with a joking tone that heavily annoyed the young child. Luffy's eyebrow twitched in annoyance, and he raised his hand, a little knife on his hand. I'll show you, he said. Before Shanks could shout at the child, Luffy had already dragged his knife under his left eye, cutting deep into his flesh and creating a deep scar under his left eye. Gah! Luffy's painful scream echoed throughout the village, making them all turn to the pirate ship with worried looks. Luffy! You damn idiot, what are you doing? Almost immediately afterwards, Shanks' angered and worried voice boomed out. Later. Luffy was sitting at the bar with Shanks sitting next to him. Normally, you'd expect the small child to be in tears from the pain. However, Luffy was no normal child. Luffy, instead of having bandages covering about half of his face, he already had deep scars where he had carved under his left eye. Luffy, you know we could have just sewn your cuts closed, right? Shanks asked the slightly scowling child. Of course I do, I just wanted to show that I wasn't afraid of pain, Luffy said, idly carving a Jolly Roger into the bar counter. Shanks was going to retort before he noticed what Luffy was doing and leaned over. Whatcha carving there, Luffy? Luffy looked up at Shanks with a large smile. This is what my Jolly Roger is gonna look like when I've got my own pirate crew. Is that so, Luffy? Shanks asked curiously, receiving a nod in response. He then smirked mischievously. Well, how the hell are you gonna be a pirate if you can't even swim? Luffy's brow twitched with annoyance at that. Well, I'll just stay out of the water, you damn drunk. Luffy shot back, only making Shanks laugh boisterously. Luffy would have continued on if he and Shanks weren't smacked upside the head. Looking up, they saw Makino with a smile on her face and a dark aura around her. What did you just say, Luffy? She asked with a sweet tone. Luffy stuttered before looking at Shanks and getting the greatest plan ever. I don't know. I've only heard Shanks use it around me, he said with the most innocence he could produce at the moment. The look on Shanks' face was one of comic betrayal and shock but turned to fear as Makino turned to him with a glare. And now Makino, let's not be rash. He pleaded, holding his hands in front of him. I'll be okay, as long as I stay on the ship. Plus, I can swim and fight too. Says Luffy, still trying to convince Shanks as he turned back to the food on his plate. I'm well trained, so my punches are like pistols. Says Luffy in his still excited tone of voice, now going through punching motions at the air in front of him. Oh really? Pistols? Asks Shanks with a bored expression. What's that supposed to mean? Asks Luffy, shouting, now a bit angry at the lack of enthusiasm from the pirate captain. And with this being said, another one of the pirates named Lucky Roo came up to speak now. He means you're too young, Luffy, says Lucky Roo, telling Luffy the reason. He's right. We got others on the crew older than you, says Yasop, making Luffy get even angrier. Please, I'm not a kid. I'm old enough, says Luffy, yelling in defiance. Calm down, Luffy. Here, have some juice, says Shanks as he gives Luffy the cup. Luffy looks at it and notices that everyone present was waiting for something. So ultimately, he drinks it all, and everyone laughs. I don't know one pirate who drinks juice. Ahahaha, says Shanks, laughing as do the others in his crew did the same as well. That's a dirty trick. You know what? The joke's on you. At least I won't get scurvy. Tomato head. says Luffy, continuing to yell at Shanks. As a vein popped out on said person's forehead, causing Shanks to now grab Luffy by his shirt's collar as he spoke in response to such words. Tomato head. Is that what you called me? Asks Shanks, shouting his question angrily, as Luffy wasn't even fazed by it. You're not deaf. That's exactly what I said. Even Makino knows it, says Luffy, responding in the same tone of voice and making Shanks go pale with a cloud of depression coming over his head, as he had become extremely quiet. Touché, says Shanks, accepting this for now. When the door was slammed open by a man with tanned skin, black hair, an X-shaped scar above his right eye, a goatee and a long coat reaching his ankles. Behind the man was a group of people all wearing white shirts, trousers and turbans on their heads with sabers strapped on their waists with red sashes. The man in front had an air of arrogance and confidence about him as he walked right up to the bar counter with a smirk on his face. So these are pirates. They all seem pretty damn weak to me. The front man said, glancing around at the pirates' presence before slapping his hand on the bar. Wench, grab me and my men here 10 barrels of your alcohol and make it quick, he said with blatant disrespect. Hearing the man's tone, Luffy quietly growled and clenched his fist, annoyance rising in him. I'm very sorry, but these other gentlemen already finished off my alcohol stock, and I won't be getting another shipment for a whole week, Makino explained with a false apologetic tone, discreetly reaching under the bar counter. I'm sorry my crew and I drank all of the alcohol, Shanks said, holding an unopened bottle of sake. You can have this one, it's unopened. He offered with a smile. The man's brow twitched in annoyance, and his eyes narrowed in anger. You think one measly bottle will satisfy us? He questioned before shattering the bottle with his sword. Who the hell do you think I am? He asked angrily. Now look at what you did. The floor's all wet, Shanks said, bending down. Makino, could you get me a rag to clean this? He asked politely. Sure, just give me a second, Makino said, about to grab a rag when she heard a loud smash and the sound of shattering glass. Now on the floor, Shanks was soaked and had food on the ground around him while the rugged man stood above him with an angry look in his eyes. TCH. It seems you need to be educated, you dumbass pirate. He almost growled, pulling out a bounty paper with his face on it. Can you read this? It says, Higuma the bear, wanted dead or alive for 8 million bearis. This means I'm a dangerous criminal, so you should be treating me with respect. Higuma said, putting his bounty poster away. Luffy saw a chest nearby with some strange fruit inside that piqued his curiosity as he peered at it as they were having that chat. The fruit was white in color but with weird blue lines all around it and deep dark purple leaves on top, much like clouds on a rainy day. The fruit had the appearance of an apple. As a result of Luffy's clever reasoning, he ate the fruit. He nearly puked when he took the first mouthful. What type of fruit is this? It tastes so horrible, he wondered, attempting to wipe away the unpleasant taste in his mouth with water. The sound of glass breaking had already drawn Luffy's attention back to the remainder of the room. Leaving the guy who described himself as Higuma from the wanted poster to have had enough of it, clicking his tongue and pulling his sword from its sheath. This gesture alone drew everyone's attention to the bandit. Leave Shanks alone, yelled Luffy at the bandit while unleashing an unknown power wave involuntarily. The oddest thing occurred when Luffy tried this. The mountain bandits, along with a couple of Shanks' crew's weaker members, began to pass out one by one. Shanks and the rest of the waking crew were wide-eyed, while the mountain bandits' commander trembled in his boots. He yelled, asked Luffy, what did you do, brat? Luffy, on the other hand, was surprised and perplexed by what had just occurred. There is no denying it. That was the spirit of the conqueror. Shanks pondered his thoughts. Before anybody could react, the mountain bandit leader drew his sword and swung it at Luffy, chopping him in two while screaming hysterically. He cried, I'm going to murder you, brat. Luffy began to glow a dark purple cloud at that point, causing the bandit leader to recoil in surprise and horror. Luffy was surrounded by black clouds, with lightning erupting from his toes to his head, a few sparks dancing about the bar, striking the floor and creating a brilliant crimson mark, nearly catching fire. The sound of a blade falling to the ground jolted everyone out of their stupor. With his lips still open, the mountain bandit leader had fainted out from shock. Before Shanks ran at Luffy, the room had become silent. Luffy, did you consume the fruit that was hidden within the chest? Luffy nodded in response to his question. Shanks then attempted to grip Luffy's shoulder, but his hand was electrified. Shanks quickly drew his hand away from him. He then turned to face Luffy before speaking. You just ate the Arashi no Mi fruit, which is part of the devil fruits category. You can't swim for the rest of your life if you eat one of these, but the one you ate is a Logia. As a result, you become a storm person, Shanks screamed. Luffy's eyes twinkle with excitement at the prospect of becoming a storm. Captain, are there any additional powers that come with the fruit? Lucky Roo, who is as surprised as everyone else, wonders. As Shanks turned to face the guy, he resolved to say something about what he knew. Yes, this fruit enables the user to transform into a storm, receiving all of the storm's abilities, including the power to change your own body to operate in various ways, but the user can also control the weather, though this is much more difficult. Even if you do get to that stage, truly controlling the weather will take a long time. The last person to consume this devil fruit is supposed to have had complete power over the weather, causing tornadoes, lightning storms, and even a snowstorm. The contents of the room are shocked at what Shanks just said. What? Asks Ben in a hushed tone, completely taken aback by the situation. Shanks noticed Luffy's lightning was still white, which meant he couldn't use red lightning, the next level. Still, the final level was dark lightning, the most dangerous form of lightning according to Shanks. The heat and amount of volts and power was enough to challenge even a Yonko, but Shanks knew Luffy would have to work for years, if not decades, to reach that level. Allowing this knowledge to sink into the group in front of him. Usopp casts a glance across at Luffy before returning his gaze to Shanks. Captain, I believe it is best to train him. This is not a situation to be taken lightly. According to Usopp, he suggested it to his commander. Agreed. It's preferable that he has some control than none at all. It would be quite beneficial to him. Among other things, Ben agrees with Usopp while expressing his own viewpoint. So, Captain, what are we going to do? Given that he utilized it, he needs some instruction. Not to mention the fact that we arrived not long ago, Lucky Roo remarks, his words falling off as he offers his opinion on the situation. This merely made Shanks pause for a second. Before eventually walking near Luffy, who is still conversing with Makino. Luffy, do you realize what you just did? Shanks says, more calmly, to check if he understands. No. To be honest, this occurs to me when I'm hunting or upset. I have no idea what it is, and no one has ever explained it to me, Luffy adds, dubious in general but honest in his response, which startled Shanks a little. Wait, you've used it before? Shanks inquires, his brows slightly arched. Yes, while I was battling monkeys with my grandfather, Luffy answers quietly. What sort of grandma treats a 7-year-old like that? Everyone there was expecting to hear this, and they found it to be really harsh. Okay, Luffy, who is your grandfather? Shanks inquires, furious and wishing to talk with the guy about how he should respect his family. Garp. Luffy scrunches his eyebrows. Silence. Luffy, what's your full name? Shanks asks with unease dripping from it, other crew members swallowing in fear of the answer. What's with all of you? What's with all the annoying questions? It's Monkey D. Luffy, what about it? A faceless lackey screeches in the background. Meanwhile, Shanks' jaw is quite literally fallen on the floor as he simply blinks because that's all he can currently remember how to do. Garp. The marine hero Garp. The only marine who could fight neck and neck with Captain Roger. One of the very few Captain Roger saw as an equal in strength and someone to look forward to fighting. The one who nearly destroyed the Oro Jackson more than once with just his fists. The one that. Luffy. What is your grandpa like? Shanks stares Luffy down. Huh. His fists hurt. He calls it his fists of love. But they really hurt. Really. He always throws me into forests or down bottomless trenches or makes me fight wild animals in order to make me a strong marine. When I say I don't wanna be a marine, he'll hit me a lot. Yup. Definitely Garp. Shanks swallows. You mean to tell me the hero of the Marines is your grandfather? Asks Shanks, shouting in shock due to knowing the man's reputation and power, while making Makino laugh a bit from his shocking nature, as he had to regain his composure upon hearing this. Okay, Luffy, before I decide even remotely to train you for a bit, what's your dream? Asks Shanks, curious to know to determine something. Well, I want to be. Huh, everyone thought the same after hearing what Luffy just said. The rest of Shanks' crew had various different reactions, from laughter to shock, to somehow respect. Makino felt tears in her eyes. She had never heard Luffy say that before. At that moment, Makino knew Luffy would one day achieve that. She wondered how Garp would react to it, how Dragon himself would react. But the one who was silent during all this was none other than Shanks, who, instead of seeing Luffy, saw his old captain. Same words. Shanks thought with a smile. At that moment, he felt something he hadn't felt for a long time, hope. Deciding to break the silence, Shanks instead asked about his first dream instead. Why King of the Pirates? Asks Shanks. Because the king is the one with the most freedom in this world, says Luffy, surprising Shanks, as this was the same towards the crew. Just you wait. I am going to have the greatest adventure and find the One Piece and become king of the pirates. Luffy says, with determination oozing off of him and causing everyone to smile and Shanks to see an image of his old captain Galdi. Roger behind Luffy. You can stay here for some time. Garp won't return for a year at least. You can stay here for that long, Makino suggested. Shanks thought of that before deciding to stay here for a bit longer. After deciding to stay for a bit longer than they had originally planned. Luffy. Yelled Shanks, getting Luffy's attention. Come with me, he said as he began walking away. Okay, Luffy, let me tell you how things are going to happen once we start training, Shanks said, getting Luffy's attention. Luffy also noticed that Ben, Roo, and Usopp were standing by the doorway. First thing that will happen is Lucky Roo is going to teach you how to control that devil fruit of yours a bit, then from there every day in the morning Ben is going to teach you navigation and history along with battle strategy and anything else he comes up with. That will be for about 3 hours a day every day. The rest of the day is either spent with me teaching you hockey or Usopp teaching you how to shoot. Whatever extra time you have, you will train to master your devil fruit powers, or you can do that after you either master hockey or sharpshooting. Understood? Asked Shanks, to which Luffy nodded and spoke. Yep, now I have one question. He said, which Shanks nodded for him to proceed. Can I eat during training? He said, causing Shanks to burst out laughing, the same for his crew. After Shanks had explained everything to Luffy again to make sure he understood, he began to explain to Luffy what hockey was and how it may be useful in combat. To say that Luffy liked the idea was an understatement. Luffy repeatedly begged Shanks to start his training until Shanks finally caved and started teaching him observation hockey. The following day, Shanks took Luffy into the forest to start training his hockey, starting with observation hockey. Luffy would every day return with bruises. Makino would get worried, but Shanks reassured her that he wasn't doing anything extreme to hurt him. After months and months of training, Luffy had taken the grasp of all 3 forms of hockey, even training his devil fruit abilities. Luffy was strictly denied the use of his abilities unless he was in the company of Shanks, Ben Beckman, Usopp or Lucky LaRue. During their long stay, Luffy noticed that Shanks had grown quite friendly with Makino, but when asked about it, she had blushed but just avoided the question. In the 7th month staying with Luffy, they got a visit from a certain Dracula who, according to Luffy, was quite powerful and even somehow scary in the beginning. But the following day, Luffy asked him something that made the whole crew and Shanks hold their breath, some inferencing with amusement. Do you want to join my crew? Luffy had asked with a grin not leaving his face. At first, Luffy had wondered if he was a pirate like Shanks, but that wasn't exactly the case. Therefore, Luffy had thought that maybe he could become his first crewmate. What was the harm in asking? Luffy barely escaped his attack before Luffy started running away, with Mihawk chasing after him, swinging his giant sword around, barely missing Luffy, who was running for his life. That went on for almost half a day. Almost the whole forest was cut in half. At the end of the chase, the swordsman had told Luffy that he was impressed with his abilities to dodge his attacks. Mihawk had stayed for a week. Before leaving, Luffy had yelled at the top of his lungs at Mihawk. You will join once I defeat you. Eventually, 1 year passed. Garp had called, letting Makino know that he was arriving. Luffy was sitting at the bar counter with Shanks. The rest of the red-haired pirates were getting supplies for the upcoming voyage. So, your grandpa's comin' next month, huh? Well, we should leave then, Shanks stated, but Luffy was quiet. The day soon came when it was time for the crew to depart. Luffy stood on the docks as they loaded various supplies onto the ship. After a little taunting from Shanks, Luffy began a loud outburst. No matter what, I will become the Pirate King. Luffy shouted at Shanks and the red-haired pirates while they watched from the docks with boxes of supplies. Shanks smiled lightly and took off his favorite straw hat before proudly placing it on Luffy's head. I'll let you look after this hat. It's my favorite and very important. Luffy's eyes dripped with tears for a few seconds while they finished loading the supplies and moved to stand with the rest of the townspeople who took part in waving goodbye. Luffy grasped Shanks' straw hat shakily and watched as the ship faded into the distance. Someday. Return it to me. As a great pirate. It's a promise. Luffy. After 1 month. They traipsed through the thickets and groves of Mt. Corvo. Garp held Luffy by the scruff of his dark blue 56 sleeveless t-shirts while Luffy continued to grunt and struggle. He occasionally would try to shock Garp by reaching to grab Garp's hand, but Garp immediately saw it each time and slapped it away before rewarding him with another sore bump on his head. Luffy continued to struggle for most of the way, biting and gripping various objects in attempts to free himself but with little or no success. Try as he might to channel the electricity through his shirt, but couldn't from anywhere but his hands. Let me go, G-chan. Luffy would cry out as he hung awkwardly by his shirt. I promised Shanks that I would be the king of the pirates. Cut it with the pirate crap. Garp rebuffed Luffy while they continued up the trail. On top of eating a devil fruit, you talk nonsense. Garp acclaimed loudly, Luffy, I won't allow you to become a pirate. You must become the strongest Navy Marine. Befriending that red hair. Bah, you idiot. The rant eventually died down once Luffy stopped struggling, but he still hung by his shirt uncomfortably. The air soon became quiet as they walked through Mt. Corvo. You'll be staying with a friend for a little while, and I'll be back when I can to check on you regularly and pick you up when it's time. Garp trailed off, leaving Luffy puzzled while he stared up at his grandfather. Time. Time for what? Luffy questioned though Garp turned his head in the other direction and seemed to be thinking heavily. Well. Garp began very hesitantly, before his expression and tone changed. Oh, I forgot to tell you, Luffy. Garp suddenly shifted in tone and looked down into the baffled face of Luffy. There is someone else that will be staying with you while you're there. He was a very good person the last time I saw him, so the two of you should get along well. After all, he's your adopted brother, so be a good boy. Brother? Luffy asked questioningly to himself. They walked until they came to a large wooden house. Luffy stayed behind while Garp knocked on the door. Hello. Dayton. Garp shouted while Luffy examined the poorly built shack. What is this place? Luffy said before running around to explore a little. The door suddenly burst open with a loud yell as the very angry Dayton slammed the door open in rage before a terrifying mean glare from Garp silenced her. Garp-san. Dayton reeled back in fright as Dogra and Magra emerged from the curtained door, also in a frightened state. You're looking rather well, Garp commented casually. Give me a break. Please have mercy on me. That devil of a child Ace is 10 years old already. Dayton pleaded desperately while Dogra attempted to reason with Garp. Putting that aside, Garp began to say, prompting an angry response from Dogra. Dayton continued to watch Luffy chase a dragonfly before yelling at him. Garp grabbed the back of the neck of Luffy's shirt and held him up high. Look after him for a while, too, Garp said nonchalantly with Luffy dangling in his left hand. Dayton and both Magra and Dogra were left silent. Luffy, say hello. Garp prompted, earning a quick, yo. From Luffy. Who is that kid? Magra asked silently. His answer was probably both the least expected and the least welcomed. He is my grandson, Garp answered. A brief moment of silence ensued before all three bandits burst out with loud shouts and howls of surprise. We cannot take him. All three sternly replied at the same time. Garp stood in front of them with his arms crossed in front of his chest. All three broke out in a cold sweat as Garp used his own methods of persuasion. Meanwhile, the dragonfly teetered and tottered along in the wind while Luffy gave chase. A subtle irritating noise from the forest a short distance away broke his carefree chase, and he stopped in his tracks to stare at what seemed to be the source of the noise. Shadowed underneath the trees, Luffy spotted a small boy. He sat on top of a large animal, carrying a long pole and was dressed in a sleeveless orange shirt. His face was slightly obscured by the shadow of the trees towering above him. Garp momentarily ceased his torture of Dayton, Magra, and Dagra and turned to greet the young boy politely. Ace! Garp politely exclaimed and walked over. Luffy, this is Ace. He's 3 years older than you. You'll be living with them from now on. Dayton angrily stood up to protest, but Garp silenced them all with a deathly leer. We'll take him. All of them said simultaneously. Good, Garp said politely before walking up to them as they stood upright. Much to their surprise, he leaned over and whispered to Dayton behind his left hand. Garp whispered something to Dayton quietly. Dayton was greatly surprised by this and wanted to inquire further but waited patiently while Garp continued. I'll be back to pick him up then. Garp lowered his hand and began to stride away before he felt Dayton put a firm grip on his shoulder. Hold on a second, why only 3 years? We've raised Ace for a lot longer than that, so why can't you take him with you? Dayton pleaded, hoping for a desperately needed reprieve from dealing with numerous traps and falls of raising the devil's child himself. Garp turned around and began whispering again, I'm not at liberty to discuss it, but it's something that could change everything. I can hardly get off from work with Sengoku, though, and Luffy needs to find his own way and gain experience and strength. I'm leaving it up to you to just watch over him until he's grown up enough. I'll be back from time to check on him and see how he's progressing. Garp said in a hushed and covered voice, Dayton before she relinquished her grip on Garp's shoulder, and he walked down the road. Dayton, however, let out a slight gasp at the old man as he walked back into the forest and seemingly reached out to speak again. Garp began walking back into the forest before stopping once more and glancing over at Luffy before whispering at Dayton from the small distance. Oh yes, don't tell Luffy that. Garp whispered, leaving Dayton even more stunned than before. Wait. Garp-san. What about contributing some child support for? Dagra began to say before being interrupted, put it on my tab. He waved off carefreely. This isn't a bar. Dagra angrily shouted as Garp walked off into the forest. Luffy, however, stayed in a slight stupor for a few seconds until he blinked out of it and walked over to the young boy. Hey! Luffy said happily. The young boy was unresponsive and simply jumped down from the large animal and walked forward with his head kept low. Luffy continued to advance cheerfully until he walked right past him. Luffy turned around, puzzled for a bit, before following after him. Hey! Ace! Luffy continued to shout and run while Ace ran into the opposite side of the thickets in the woods. Luffy gave chase to the young boy, now introduced as Ace, running into the thick bushes. Ace moved fast through the passing trees' nefarious bushes as Luffy persistently gave chase. A few minutes later, into the chase, Luffy emerged at an empty clearing surrounded by tall trees. He was covered in scratches from numerous prickly bushes and dirty from several falls. Luffy panted a little as he scanned around, looking for Ace, but finding nobody in sight. He continued to glance around the clearing, looking and listening for anything that might give him a hint to where he was or which direction he went. He only had to scan a few seconds before he heard a rustle in the bushes behind him. Luffy turned around and rushed for the bushes before pushing the thickets aside and gazing at what was also an empty space, save for a large rock that laid unevenly on the ground. Luffy scratched his head in confusion before he felt a slim arm wrap around his head and clamp around his mouth before he could turn around. Luffy was taken aback and struggled while letting out muffled yells and arm waves. He immediately put electricity on his body, causing whoever had grabbed him to yell out in pain. Luffy dropped to the ground and panted a second to breathe in the fresh air and turned his gaze upon the perpetrator, who was none other than Ace. Alright, first off, don't follow me. Ace bluntly stated, it's annoying if I have you tagging along for the ride and. The boy said, standing straight up and seeming to be towering over Luffy. Luffy started to speak, but. No buts. You can get lost in this forest, and I'd hate to be responsible if something bad were to happen to you. A slightly evil look passed over his eyes briefly, though Luffy didn't notice it. But I just wanted to be friends. Luffy said, only for Ace to laugh slightly. I don't need friends. Go back to Dayton's cabin and stop following me, it'll be safer for you that way. Ace said firmly and started walking again towards the direction he'd been heading before. He was surprised, however, when he heard a loud voice from behind him. No, I won't go back, Luffy said out loud, causing Ace to turn around to stare at him briefly. He stared at him with an emotionless expression for a few seconds before turning back to the direction towards his destination. Suit yourself. But, Ace said, bending down slightly to pick up a small rock. Luffy was a little confused at the cut-off sentence and got closer to look at what Ace was doing as he bent down a little. Ace mentally counted the amount of footsteps he heard and swiftly turned around and threw the rock he'd picked up to the near top of the closest tree. Luffy stopped to gaze at the rock as it traveled upward and impacted a small bundle at the top. The rock had carried enough force to cause the bundle to sway a great deal. Luffy continued looking up as the bundle suddenly dislodged itself and began falling straight at him. Luffy just dodged the rocks. Ace ran while Luffy was still dodging. After the rocks stopped falling, Luffy stared back where Ace was but saw him nowhere. Well, very good, Shanks trained my haki, Luffy spoke to himself before walking towards wherever Ace was going. Soon Luffy saw Ace again, and it didn't take long for Luffy to meet Sabo, who looked more open to the idea of having Luffy as their friend. Ace wasn't sure, but after a month, Luffy had become their friend. Soon Luffy shared his desire to become the Pirate King, with Sabo stating that he wanted to become a pirate as well, and so did Ace. Luffy showed his new friends his devil fruit powers before talking about haki. To say Ace was excited would be an understatement. After 1 week, Luffy had started training them on how to use haki, as much knowledge as he had on haki. After 6 months, there was snow on the ground when they woke up that morning, so Luffy threw himself out of their hideout to land in the white fluffy stuff, laughing merrily all the while. Ace and Sabo were much more delicate about it, as even with snow on the ground, they didn't have bodies to blunt their falls. They barely touched the ground before they took snowballs to the face, however, and while Sabo laughed, Ace shouted at Luffy and took off after him, fully intending to bury Luffy up to his neck in snow. Eventually, Sabo stepped in and rescued Luffy from his chilly fate while Ace and Luffy continued to snipe at each other. This was their brotherhood now, and Ace and Sabo had fallen into their roles as older brothers. Sabo was the indulgent one, who encouraged and comforted, while Ace was the rough one, doling out reprimands and the occasional knock to the head. Not because he didn't care. He did, which was the horribly embarrassing part of the whole thing. Their breakfast plans were spoiled by the discovery that the lake had frozen over. While Ace sat and contemplated cutting a hole in the ice to do fishing, Luffy had whooped and taken off across the ice. Luffy! Get back here! Sabo shouted before Ace could react. No way! This is fun! Luffy laughed and slid over the ice, poorly mimicking skating but having the time of his life anyway. Ace, meanwhile, had thoughts of thin patches of ice just waiting to collapse under the weight of an idiot like Luffy. I'm not going to save you if you fall through the ice. Sabo will. That seemed enough for Sabo, who laughed and walked onto the ice himself. Of course. Ace scowled and muttered, traitor, under his breath as Sabo slid after Luffy. From the bank, Ace watched as Sabo skated over to Luffy, colliding with him as they both laughed and clung to each other. Watching Luffy and Sabo, Ace suspected that Sabo had wanted a friendship like that all along. Unconditional brotherly love freely given, asking nothing in return but for that love to be accepted. Sabo was more than happy to both give and receive such love. The ease in which Sabo had slid into his role as an older brother was proof positive. It made Ace's chest tighten. He wasn't jealous, how could he be jealous of Sabo? But he did wish that it was that easy for him, too. Luffy was an idiot, sure, but he was an honest idiot who wasn't stingy with his affection. Sabo ate it up, but Ace was. Well, he didn't know exactly what he was, but he brushed off Luffy's any attempts at affection like he'd been burned. Suddenly both Ace and Sabo slipped and fell on the ice, causing a loud thud. Ace tensed, waiting for the crack of ice and the screams that would follow, but they never came. Instead, there was a moment of silence before both Sabo and Luffy burst into laughter. As Sabo and Luffy stood up, Luffy waved over to Ace. Come on, Ace. This is fun. Ace scowled immediately. What if something tries to eat us? We should be training. We can have fun sometimes, Ace. Come join us. Once again, Ace muttered, traitor, under his breath in response to Sabo waving at him. It was clear that this was an instance where Sabo was going to side with Luffy no matter what Ace said. With that in mind, Ace finally stood up and glared at Sabo and Luffy. Ace took a step onto the ice, half expecting it to collapse under his weight even if it had stood up to Sabo and Luffy's play. When it didn't, he clenched his fists and took another step towards Sabo and Luffy, who took a step back. Then, all at once, Ace took off across the ice, half running and half skating. Sabo and Luffy yelped and tried to run, but they slipped instead, allowing Ace to barrel into them. The force sent all three of them sailing across the ice into a snowbank on the other side of the lake. One by one, they poked their heads out of the snow, staying there in tense silence as the moments ticked by. Finally, Ace was the first to snort, and then all three of them were laughing as they rolled out of the snow. The remainder of the morning and much of the afternoon was spent skating on the lake, having a very intense snowball fight, and building a snowman with Luffy inside, much to Luffy's indignation and Ace and Sabo's amusement. There were no thoughts of the monsters that lurked in the forest or people saying that any son of Gold Roger would be an unwanted demon. It was just three brothers having a good time in the snow without a care in the world. It was only when Luffy's stomach growled so loudly it scared all three of them that they realized they hadn't eaten breakfast or lunch. Then it was business as usual, with the three of them teaming up to take down a bear for dinner. As they sat around the fire they made to cook the meat, Ace couldn't help but think of how easy it had been, once he stopped fighting it, to act like a normal kid. It had been fun to play with Sabo and Luffy, even if it hadn't aided them at all in getting stronger. Now that it was over, Ace was back to scowling at the fire and scowling at Luffy, who sat whining about how hungry he was. Ace started to open his mouth to tell Luffy to stop whining, but Sabo spoke first. Not much longer, Luffy. He gave Luffy a friendly smile. Why don't you just enjoy the fire and warm up a little? Luffy tilted his head with a frown. Warm up. Sabo mimicked the head tilt and frown. We have been out in the snow all day. Luffy blinked at him, then his eyes widened, and he wrapped his arms around himself. Wah! It's cold. Ace groaned. You just now noticed. While Ace and Luffy exchanged a glare, Sabo let out a resigned sigh. The entire day had been a welcome change if Ace was honest with himself. Getting Luffy to go back in the hideout and not go out and play some more was a bit of a challenge, but a solid knock to the head was a good incentive. Luffy rubbed his head and mumbled about how mean Ace was under his breath, but when he flopped onto his sleeping mat, he wouldn't stop squirming. Quit it and go to sleep, Luffy. I can't. I wanna go play some more. If you don't quit squirming, I'll tell you a story. Me and Ace will. Sabo. Luffy had taken the bait, though, and he beamed at them. I wanna hear the story. Sabo gave Ace a look that actually made Ace freeze with its intensity. He then grinned at Luffy. It's a story about a hero who saved the whole Grand Line from a group of nasty bandits. Although reluctant at first, Ace eventually joined in on spinning a wild tale of piracy and heroism on the Grand Line with bandit villains that sounded a lot like a certain group they knew. And he was a true hero. Do you know why? When Luffy shook his head, Sabo grinned. Because he shared his meat with everyone. Luffy's eyes widened in horror. I never want to be a hero. Ace had to muffle his snicker at that, and he could see that Sabo was biting his lip in an attempt not to laugh as well. Of course, Luffy would balk at heroism if it meant he had to share his meat. He reached out and shoved Luffy down, feeling a little resistance as his body hit the mat. You got your story, now go to sleep. But I wanna stay up and. Ace is right, Luffy. Go to sleep. Finally, Sabo was back on his side. Luffy just scowled and continued to whine, making Ace wonder why in the world he had included him in the vow of brotherhood. He was whiny and weak, a crybaby who needed help constantly and ate more than his fair share of food. Ace was just about ready to hit Luffy over the head, the potential for Luffy to begin crying be damned. Then, all at once, Luffy fell back onto his mat, snoring away. Ace and Sabo blinked, then exchanged a look. Sabo chuckled nervously. Well, at least he's asleep. Sabo scratched the back of his head, but he carefully reached over to grab Luffy's blanket and cover him with it. The whole thing made Ace wrinkle his nose. He might get spoiled if you keep acting like that. Sabo made a face as he finished covering Luffy with the blanket. Being nice to him isn't spoiling him. Our little brother's gotta grow up to be the Pirate King, right? Ace snorted and shook his head. I can't believe he said that. He'll be lucky if he can even get past the Lord of the Coast. If he can stop crying long enough to even get in a boat. They both shared a laugh at that. This was why it was the three of them and not just him and Sabo. Luffy was annoying sometimes, sure, but he was good for both of them. Sabo obviously adored being a big brother and Ace. Ace felt like he had a place in the world. He had a little brother who needed him. Two brothers to get him to relax and play in the snow. A little brother who was snoring like crazy and another brother sleeping nearby, making him feel like it really had been a good thing he was born. He didn't think he'd be able to get over how embarrassing it would be to tell Sabo and Luffy that to their faces, but as he drifted off to the sound of their breathing, it was enough to have them nearby. After 3 months, Garp was making his way through the forest. All he could think was Luffy and Ace. As far as he could tell, Luffy wasn't going to change his mind, but Garp wanted Luffy to become a marine. He knew a person like Luffy could potentially become a hero of the world, but possibly do something about celestial dragons, for the world to be free of. Inside the house, Luffy, Ace and Sabo were busy eating and talking. I will become the captain while you two will become my servants, Ace stated with a grin, trying to take a bite, but Luffy grabbed it from his hand, much to his annoyance. Like hell, I will be the captain while you two will call me Captain Luffy, or better yet Pirate King Luffy, he said, grinning evilly with a puff at the end. Sabo was watching silently in amusement. Ace was about to say something when the bandits, including Dayton at the other side of the table, suddenly spit out the water from their mouth. Ace and Luffy looked confused at their sudden and strange new face of fear. He glanced at Luffy, who was looking behind them with terror written all over his face. Ace felt a sudden dread feeling creep inside his body. So you brats still haven't learned a thing. A voice yelled out. Before Ace or Luffy could even comprehend what was happening, a fist hit both of them in the head, causing them to fall flat in the ground rubbing their heads in pain. Dayton, he called out. Yes, sir, she said before she got a fist in the head. Wow, who is this? Sabo asked, clearly intimidated by the person's size in front of him, not mentioning that he had never seen Luffy in this kind of pain before. Sure, they would train and try to hit each other, but Luffy never showed pain. Garp heard the little voice and turned to see a little boy with blonde hair and a strange hat. Who are you? Sabo felt nervous from the old man's gaze. He gulped and was trying to speak before Luffy stood up, ready to defend Sabo. Don't harm Sabo, he's our brother now, Luffy stated, standing in front of Sabo while Ace was questioning why Luffy was telling this to Garp. Garp, on the other hand, grinned before he started cracking his knuckles. It seems I have an extra child in the baggage. The three brothers glanced at each other before running out in the wilderness like crazy, followed closely by Garp. Later. After almost 6 hours of running around for their lives, Garp stopped chasing them, seeing as they were exhausted, but still standing on their legs and not giving up yet. 6 hours, quite impressive. Now, you three will start a fire, Garp ordered. The brothers didn't try to say anything against it despite their exhaustion. Soon they started with the fire. Garp sat close while the other three were at the other side, patiently waiting for whatever Garp would throw at them. The silence took over them. As Garp kept staring at the flames, the only sound heard was the sound of the wood burning and cracking. Garp glanced at his grandson before letting out a sigh. You want to be pirates? Garp asked, but more like a statement, his eyes looking at the three. They gulped, not remembering being so scared before, even Luffy, who had met the likes of Mihawk. The three nodded since there was no reason to hide it. You, Sabo, tell me why you want to be a pirate, Garp asked. Sabo gulped before getting up. Because pirates are people who are the most free. I want to travel the world and write a book perhaps, Sabo stated without fear. Garp understood it but said nothing to the kid. His eyes turned to Ace. I want to become a famous pirate one day, to have my own name, Ace stated, All fear was gone and instead stood a boy who showed no fear. I will never run away, Ace thought determinedly. Garp again said nothing before turning to look at Luffy, who had already stood up, his chest high and with a big grin on his face. I want to be. Huh, was the only answer from Garp after hearing his grandson, who was grinning like crazy. Sabo had laughed when Luffy said that when they became brothers, Ace had thought it was a childish dream, but Garp didn't laugh or thought it was stupid. Instead, he felt pride like never before for his godson. A smile erupted on his face before standing up. If that's your dream, Luffy, then you three will need to train. Garp spoke. The three brothers were quite shocked at hearing Garp. But I'm telling you now, right now, sleep, because tomorrow morning we will start the torture. I meant training. Garp said, laughing at the horror-filled faces of Sabo, Ace and Luffy. The forest clearing echoed with the sound of chirping birds and rustling leaves, a peaceful morning that was about to be shattered by the infamous fist of love. Garp stood before his three grandsons with a grin that would make even seasoned Marines break into a cold sweat. Ace, Sabo, and Luffy sat cross-legged on the grass, their expressions a mix of determination and growing concern. Biwahaha. You brats wanted to learn observation hockey. Well, prepare yourselves for the training from hell. Garp's voice boomed through the clearing, scaring away nearby wildlife. Luffy bounced excitedly. Yosh. I'm gonna be the king of the... Bonk. A baseball connected squarely with Luffy's head, sending him face first into the dirt. OWWWW. Grandpa, that hurt. Luffy whined, a sizable bump already forming on his head. Of course it hurt. Pain is going to be your best friend from now on. Garp laughed heartily while juggling three more baseballs. Now, put on those blindfolds. Sabo adjusted his blindfold nervously. Garp-san, isn't there a gentler way to? Thwack. Nope. Garp answered cheerfully as Sabo nursed a fresh bump. Ace smirked beneath his blindfold. Ha. I bet I'll master this before any of you. Whack. Less talking, more sensing. Garp called out, already winding up for another throw. The next 2 hours were filled with a symphony of thwacks, bonks, and various creative expressions of pain. Luffy bounced around like a pinball with each hit, while Sabo developed an impressive collection of bumps that made him look like a human mountain range. My head feels like meat being tenderized, Luffy moaned, sprawled on his back. Your head is meat being tenderized, Sabo replied, dodging left but getting hit from the right. Ow. How is he throwing these so fast? Biwahaha. You think Piirates will announce where they're attacking from? Garp launched another volley of baseballs. Ace, despite his growing frustration, remained focused. Something was starting to feel different, like a subtle tingling at the edge of his consciousness. A baseball whistled through the air, and for the first time, Ace felt its approach before hearing it. He tilted his head slightly, and the ball whizzed past his ear. I did it. Ace jumped up triumphantly, still blindfolded. Good job, grandson. Garp's proud voice came from somewhere to his left. Ace beamed with pride, for approximately half a second. Wham! A much harder throw sent Ace flying into a tree trunk. What the hell, old man? Ace shouted, ripping off his blindfold. Garp stood there, tossing another baseball up and down. Lesson 2. Never let your guard down. In fact. Bonk. OWWWW. Luffy's voice came from somewhere in the bushes. I wasn't even part of this conversation. Exactly. Garp's laughter echoed through the forest. Enemies won't wait for you to finish your victory speech. Sabo, who had been quietly trying to sense incoming attacks, suddenly felt something approaching. He ducked, successfully avoiding a baseball, only to be hit by two more from different directions. How are you throwing multiple balls at once? Sabo demanded. Biwahaha. Did you really think just because I'm old? I'm also not fast. Yes. The three boys said, uncertain, not liking where this was going. I was one of the only Marines that was able to go toe-to-toe with the king of the pirates, Roger. What? All three boys shouted in unison. Now you have to sense multiple attackers. Luffy pulled himself out of the bushes, leaves stuck in his hair. That's not fair, Grandpa. Thwack. Pirates don't play fair either. Garp reminded them as Luffy rolled away like a rubber ball. I'm starting to think this was a bad idea, Sabo muttered, narrowly avoiding one baseball only to be hit by another. Ace, back on his feet, put his blindfold back on with renewed determination. No way. We asked for this training, and we're going to master it. That's the spirit. Garp approved, before promptly hitting Ace with 3 consecutive throws. But spirit alone won't save you from my fist of love. It's not love if it hurts this much. Luffy protested, somehow managing to get hit even while complaining. The training continued with Garp's booming laughter providing the soundtrack to their suffering. Occasionally, he'd share wisdom between throws. Remember, observation hockey is about feeling the intent behind attacks. Bonk. Like the intent to give you a headache. Exactly, Sabo. Biwahaha. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the 3 brothers showed small signs of improvement. Ace could now dodge 1 in every 5 throws. Sabo had developed a sixth sense for when Garp was about to launch a particularly nasty throw, and Luffy. Well, Luffy was still getting hit, but he was bouncing back faster. Grandpa, Luffy called out, rubbing his latest bump, when can we take a break? Break. Biwahaha. We've barely started. This is just the morning warm-up. The color drained from all 3 boys' faces. Warm-up. Sabo stammered. Of course. After lunch, we'll switch to coconuts. Coconuts. They screamed in horror. Thwack. Bonk. Whack. Rule number 1 of observation hockey. Never lose focus during battle. Garp declared as all 3 boys lay twitching on the ground. I think I'm seeing stars, Luffy mumbled. Those aren't stars, that's just your brain rattling around, Ace groaned. At least you have a brain to rattle, Sabo quipped, earning weak chuckles from his brothers. Garp watched them with pride, though he'd never admit it. Their determination to get stronger, despite the brutal training, reminded him of himself at their age. Still, he had an image to maintain. Alright, you've had enough rest. Back on your feet. Let's see if you can dodge while doing handstands. What? Biwahaha. Trust me, this will help your balance. As the 3 brothers reluctantly assumed handstand positions, still blindfolded, Garp prepared another round of baseballs. Grandpa, Luffy called out, his voice wobbling as he struggled to maintain his handstand, I'm hungry. Thwack. Hunger is just another form of training. That doesn't even make sense. Ace protested. Bonk. Making sense is for weaklings. Your teaching methods are questionable. Sabo observed. Whack. Question my methods after you can dodge my throws. And so the morning continued, filled with flying baseballs, growing bumps, and Garp's endless laughter. The forest clearing, once peaceful, now echoed with the sounds of training, pain, and the occasional straw hat flying around the air sometimes until Luffy grabbed it and put it back on his head. Deep down, all 3 brothers knew this was just the beginning of their journey to becoming stronger. Though they'd never admit it to Garp, they were grateful for his training, no matter how brutal it seemed. Just as this touching thought crossed their minds. Thwack. Bonk. Whack. Emotional moments or openings for attack. Biwahaha. We hate you, Grandpa. That's the spirit. Now, who's ready for coconuts? After a lunch break that lasted precisely 47 seconds, according to Garp's generous timing, the afternoon training session began with Garp hauling 3 enormous sacks of coconuts into the clearing. Now then, Garp grinned, holding up a coconut like it was a precious gem. These are much harder to sense than baseballs because they're heavier and move differently through the air. Biwahaha. Luffy gulped audibly. They look really hard. That's because they are. Perfect for building character. Garp launched a coconut without warning, catching Luffy square in the face. OWWW. Even with my storm powers, that really hurts. Luffy wailed. Sabo raised his hand tentatively. Garp-san, isn't this a bit extreme? Thunk. A coconut bounced off Sabo's head, sending him spinning like a top. The only thing extreme is your lack of awareness. Garp bellowed cheerfully. Now, this time, I want you to not only dodge but catch the coconuts. Ace, already sporting several bumps from the morning session, tied his blindfold with determination. Catch them. How are we supposed to? Thwack. Figure it out. That's part of the training. Garp called out as Ace peeled himself off a tree trunk. The clearing soon became a danger zone of flying coconuts. Remember, Garp shouted between throws, feel the intent. Feel the trajectory. Feel the pain. Luffy finished as another coconut caught him in the stomach. Exactly. Biwahaha. Sabo, applying his analytical mind to the challenge, tried to establish a pattern. If I calculate the approximate angles and timing of the throws, 3 coconuts simultaneously struck him from different directions. No calculating. Feel it in your gut. Garp corrected. My gut's too busy feeling coconuts. Sabo groaned. Ace, meanwhile, had managed to sense an incoming coconut and attempted to catch it. The result was a painful reminder that catching something you can't see requires more than just putting your hands out. Ow. My fingers. Good attempt. Garp praised, immediately following up with 2 more coconuts. But next time, try not to catch it with your face. The training intensified as Garp introduced new elements to increase difficulty. Now spin in circles while dodging. Jump on one leg. Do a handstand. Sing the marine anthem. I don't even know the marine anthem. Luffy protested. Thunk. Then make one up. Soon, the clearing was filled with the sound of coconuts hitting trees, ground, and unfortunate training participants, accompanied by a very off-key rendition of what Luffy thought a marine anthem should sound like. Marines are mean and throw coconuts. They hit us hard and give us boo-boos. Grandpa's crazy, that's for sure. Our heads are hurting more and more. That's the worst marine anthem I've ever heard. Garp laughed, punctuating each word with a coconut throw. 10 more coconuts as punishment. As the afternoon wore on, small improvements became noticeable. Ace managed to partially deflect a coconut instead of taking the full impact. Sabo successfully predicted the direction of several throws, even if his timing was still off. And Luffy. Well, Luffy had developed an impressive ability to bounce coconuts off his storm body in random directions, occasionally hitting back at Garp of all people. Did I hit someone? Luffy asked excitedly after hearing a distant, oof. Thunk. Focus on your own training. Garp admonished, though there was pride in his voice. By sunset, the clearing looked like a coconut battlefield. Broken shells littered the ground, several trees had suspicious dents, and 3 exhausted boys lay sprawled in various positions. I can't feel my everything, Sabo mumbled. I think I've got coconut fragments in places coconut fragments shouldn't be, Ace groaned. I'm hungry again, Luffy whined. Garp stood over them, juggling 3 coconuts with ease. Well, you've all survived day 1. Tomorrow we'll work on. There's more. They screamed in unison. Biwahaha. Of course. Next time we'll combine baseball and coconut training. How would that even work? Sabo asked, immediately regretting his question. Simple. We'll put baseballs inside the coconuts. The 3 brothers shared a look of absolute horror. Can't we go back to regular punching? Luffy pleaded. Thunk. 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 Final lesson of the day. Never ask for easier training. Now, who's hungry for coconut juice? As Garp cheerfully cracked open coconuts for them to drink, the brothers silently vowed to master observation haki as quickly as possible, if only to avoid any more of Grandpa's creative training methods. Though none of them would admit it, they had already started to sense the presence of coconuts a split second before impact. Whether this was actually observation haki or simply traumatic conditioning remained to be seen. Tomorrow's going to be even better. Garp announced with his signature grin. We're gonna die, all 3 brothers muttered in perfect synchronization, before being hit with one final round of coconuts for their pessimism. After 1 month. Flames of innocence lost. The night sky glowed an unnatural orange, casting twisted shadows through the forest canopy. 3 small figures stood frozen at the forest's edge, their eyes reflecting the inferno that consumed the gray terminal. The crackling of flames couldn't drown out the screams. They really did it, Sabo whispered, his hands trembling at his sides. They actually set fire to everything. Ace's fists were clenched so tight his knuckles had turned white. We heard the rumors, but this. He swallowed hard, watching as a figure emerged from the smoke, a flame, only to collapse mid-stride. Luffy stood between his brothers, uncharacteristically still. His straw hat cast a shadow over his eyes, but tears streamed silently down his cheeks. The smoke carried the scent of burning wood, plastic, and something else, something that made all three boys instinctively know they would never forget this night. Help! Someone, please! A woman's voice cut through the roar of flames. She was carrying a child, running blindly through the maze of fire. Luffy took a step forward, but Ace's hand shot out, gripping his shoulder. We can't, Ace's voice cracked. We'd never make it through that inferno. But they're dying, Luffy's words came out barely above a whisper. They're dying, and we're just watching. Sabo wrapped an arm around Luffy's shoulders. Sometimes being powerless is the worst pain of all. Another explosion rocked the terminal, sending burning debris flying. The screams intensified, then gradually began to fade, not because the chaos was subsiding, but because there were fewer voices left to scream. The nobles, Ace spat the word like poison. They're watching from their wall. I can see their lights. They're watching people burn like it's some kind of show. Through the thick smoke, they could indeed see the distant lights of High Town, where the nobility observed the cleansing of their kingdom's trash heap. I used to be one of them, Sabo's voice was hollow. They probably told everyone this was necessary. That it was for the good of the kingdom. They always have pretty words for ugly things. A gust of wind parted the smoke momentarily, revealing the full scope of the devastation. The gray terminal, once a maze of makeshift homes and scavenged treasures, was now a sea of flames. People who had once been neighbors were trampling each other in their desperation to escape. Luffy's body shook with silent sobs. I don't understand. Why would anyone do this? Neither Ace nor Sabo had an answer that could make sense of such cruelty. Then, through the hellish glow, they spotted it, a ship approaching the burning shoreline. They'll burn if they get too close, Ace muttered, but then something extraordinary happened. A powerful gust of wind swept across the water, pushing back the flames near the shore. It created a temporary safe passage, and the desperate survivors who noticed it began running toward the ship. That wind. Luffy's eyes widened slightly. I think I've seen that ship before, but I can't remember where. They watched as people climbed aboard, some still smoldering, others helping those who could barely walk. The ship's crew worked quickly, pulling survivors from the water and throwing down ropes. At least someone in this kingdom has a heart, Ace said quietly, his eyes fixed on the rescue effort. They can't save everyone, Sabo observed, his voice heavy with the weight of that truth. But they're saving who they can. Another explosion lit up the night, closer this time. The heat was becoming unbearable even at their distance. We should go, Sabo said, finally breaking their frozen vigil. Back to the treehouse. We can't do anything here. Ace nodded slowly, but Luffy remained rooted to the spot. Luffy, Ace's voice was gentler than usual. We have to go. I won't forget this, Luffy said, his voice carrying a resolve that seemed too heavy for his 7 years. When I become Pirate King, I won't let things like this happen. I won't let people treat others like trash to be burned. Sabo squeezed Luffy's shoulder. We'll all get stronger. Strong enough that next time, we won't have to just watch. As they turned to leave, a particularly loud scream made Luffy flinch. Ace immediately pulled his little brother close, letting him bury his face in his shirt. Don't look back, Ace instructed softly. Just keep walking. Their trek through the dark forest was silent, each lost in their own thoughts. The orange glow followed them, casting their shadows long and dark against the trees. Even the forest creatures were quiet. When they reached their treehouse, none of them made a move to climb up. Instead, they sat at the base of the tree, huddled together, unable to shake the images burned into their minds. I keep thinking about the people we knew there, Sabo finally broke the silence. Old man Jenkins who always saved interesting books for me. The lady who would mend clothes for food. The kid who used to follow us around sometimes, Ace added, his voice tight. The one with the pet rat. Luffy pulled his knees to his chest. Do you think they made it to the ship? Neither older brother answered. The truth was too heavy to voice. We should get stronger, Ace said after a long pause. Not just strong enough to fight. Strong enough to protect people. Strong enough that no one can force us to watch something like this again, Sabo agreed. Luffy raised his head, his eyes red but determined. Promise me, he said, looking at both his brothers. Promise me we'll never be like them. Like the people who did this. We promise, Luffy, both older brothers replied without hesitation. Wait. Luffy's voice cut through the somber atmosphere after a minute of silence. Before either brother could respond, he had scrambled up the treehouse with an urgency they'd never seen before. What's he doing now? Ace muttered, wiping his still damp eyes. The sound of rummaging came from above, followed by Luffy's footsteps on wood. When he jumped back down, he was clutching something in each hand. Sabo's eyes widened in recognition. Are those devil fruits? In Luffy's right hand was a fruit that looked like it was made of solidified flame, swirling patterns of red and orange dancing across its surface. In his left was a pristine white fruit with spiral patterns that seemed to emit a faint mist. Gramps gave me the fire fruit, Luffy said, his voice unusually serious. The white one's a steam fruit. Found it in the forest 2 months ago. 2 months. Ace's jaw dropped. You've been hiding devil fruits for 2 months. Gramps said to wait for the right moment. Luffy shuffled his feet. Said I'd know when. I think this is it. Sabo reached out to touch one of the fruits, then pulled his hand back. But you already ate the storm fruit. Why would Garp give you more? Not for me, Luffy shook his head. For you too. Shanks told me eating 2 devil fruits kills you. But, he looked at the still glowing horizon, after what we saw tonight, we need to be stronger. Ace stared at the fire fruit with an intensity that matched its appearance. You're sure about this, Luffy? Devil fruits are worth fortunes. And once eaten. I don't care about money. Luffy thrust the fruits forward. I care about my brothers being strong enough to fight back. A moment of silence passed between them, broken only by the distant crackling of flames. The fire fruit would suit you, Ace, Sabo observed. You've always been the most hot-headed. Oi! Ace protested, but there was a ghost of a smile on his face. What about you? Steam's just hot air, perfect for a noble's son. Ex-noble, Sabo corrected, but he was studying the white fruit with interest. Though I suppose steam can be quite powerful. Like a steam engine. Luffy added helpfully. Gramps said it's really strong, but nobody wants it 'cause it's not flashy enough. Ace picked up the fire fruit, turning it over in his hands. How bad did your fruit taste, Luffy? Like a thunderstorm in my mouth. Luffy made a face. All zingy and wrong. Well, Sabo took the steam fruit, it can't be worse than some of the things we've eaten from the dump, right? The 3 brothers shared a look, then nodded simultaneously. Together. Ace suggested. Together, Sabo agreed. Wait. Luffy held up his hands. Shanks said you gotta eat the whole thing, even the gross parts. Ace and Sabo looked at their respective fruits with growing apprehension. Bottoms up, Ace muttered, then took a massive bite. His face immediately contorted into an expression of pure disgust. It tastes like burning garbage. Sabo, following suit, wasn't faring any better. Mine's like licking a hot kettle that's been filled with swamp water. Luffy bounced anxiously. Keep eating. Keep eating. The next few minutes were filled with gagging sounds and creative cursing as the 2 older brothers forced down their fruits. I think. Ace gasped, finishing his last bite, I think I'm dying. If not, Sabo wheezed, we might wish we were. They both collapsed against the tree, looking slightly green. Do you feel any different? Luffy asked eagerly. Besides nauseous. Sabo groaned. Suddenly, Ace sneezed, and a small fireball shot from his nose, singeing a nearby bush. What the hell? He jumped back, patting his nose frantically. That was so cool. Luffy clapped. Cool. I could have burned my face off. Sabo started laughing, but his amusement turned to surprise when his breath came out as visible steam. Oh, this is interesting. Try making a big fire. Luffy suggested to Ace. I don't even know how. Ace stopped mid-sentence as his entire arm burst into flames. Ah. Don't panic. Sabo called out, then promptly began emitting steam from every pore. Oh great, now I'm doing it too. Luffy watched his brother's chaos with undisguised glee. This is awesome. Now we can all be weird together. I don't want to be on fire. Ace shouted, running in circles. The fire is you, Luffy explained, remembering Shanks' lessons. It won't hurt you. It's like how storms don't hurt me anymore. Ace gradually slowed down, realizing the flames weren't causing him any pain. This is actually kind of amazing. Sabo, meanwhile, had created enough steam to fog up the entire area. I can barely see anything. That's perfect for sneaking. Luffy beamed. And steam can burn worse than fire sometimes. Gramps showed me when he was boiling water. The fog began to clear as Sabo gained some control. We're going to need a lot of practice. Good thing we've got a training expert right here, Ace grinned, pointing at Luffy. Our little brother's had his powers the longest. Luffy puffed up with pride. I can teach you. Well, kind of. Mostly I just try things until they work. That explains so much about your fighting style, Sabo chuckled. Hey, I'm getting better. Watch this. Luffy concentrated, and a small storm cloud formed above their heads. Instead of rain, however, it dropped flower petals. Quote. You meant to do that. Ace raised an eyebrow. No. I was going for snow. The three looked at each other for a moment before bursting into laughter, the first real laughter since they'd witnessed the horror at Gray Terminal. We're going to be quite the trio, Sabo mused. Storm, fire, and steam. Luffy, Ace called out after creating his third uncontrolled fireball, how long did it take you to stop making storms when you sneezed? Oh, about 3 months. Every time I sneezed, it rained fish. Fish. Sabo paused his steam experiments. Why fish? I was usually thinking about lunch. Of course you were, both brothers said in unison. As they practiced, their powers slowly began responding to their wills rather than their emotions. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And with the ashes of Gray Terminal still cooling in the distance, they knew this was just the beginning. Next time, Luffy said as they finally collapsed from exhaustion, we'll be ready. Next time, Ace agreed, watching a small flame dance across his palm, we'll be the ones doing the saving. Next time, Sabo added, his steam curling around them protectively, we'll show them what three brothers can really do. We're gonna need a lot more training, Sabo mused, watching his hand fade to steam and back. And a new training ground, Ace added, eyeing the damaged treehouse. And meat. Luffy chimed in. Not everything is about meat. Luffy suddenly froze, his eyes widening comically. Oh yeah, I forgot to tell you something. Both older brothers turned to look at him, already dreading whatever was coming next. You, didn't actually need to eat the whole fruit, Luffy said, poking his fingers together nervously. Just one bite was enough. The clearing went deadly quiet. What? Ace's voice was dangerously flat. Yeah, Shanks told me after I ate my whole fruit. He was laughing really hard about it too. Steam literally began pouring from Sabo's ears, though this time it wasn't from his powers. You mean, we forced down those disgusting fruits? Quote. For nothing. Ace finished, small flames flickering in his hair. Shishishi. Luffy laughed, then immediately recognized his mistake when he saw his brother's expressions. Oh. I should run now, shouldn't I? 3, 2, 1. Sorry. I forgot. Luffy took off running, using a gust of wind to propel himself faster. Get back here, you little brat. Ace shouted, leaving a trail of fire in his wake as he chased after his younger brother. We ate those horrible things bite by bite. Sabo yelled, using steam to boost his speed. But you have cool powers now. Luffy's voice echoed through the trees, followed by the sound of crashing and explosions as three devil fruit users with minimal control wreaked havoc through the forest. That's not the point. I said I'm sorry. Oh look, a butterfly. Don't get distracted while we're chasing you. The forest animals watched in bewilderment as fire, steam, and small storm clouds raced past them, accompanied by screaming, laughter, and the occasional falling tree. After 1 year. The hockey lesson. Garp stood with his arms crossed, his keen eyes taking in the subtle changes in his grandsons. The way steam occasionally leaked from Sabo's collar, how Ace's fingers sparked with tiny flames when he fidgeted. So you gave them the fruits, he said to Luffy, his tone carefully neutral. Luffy met his grandfather's gaze steadily. After what happened at Gray Terminal. We needed to be stronger. HMPH. Garp's expression didn't change. In your hockey training? Well, Luffy brightened, I can sense people pretty far now. And sometimes I can make my storm attacks stronger with. He scrunched his face trying to remember the term. Armament hockey, Sabo supplied. Yeah, that. And Ace is really good at dodging stuff now. Because you keep trying to hit me with lightning. Ace interjected. And Sabo's getting better at sensing when people lie. Garp's frown deepened. And how long have you spent training your devil fruits instead? The three boys suddenly found the ground very interesting. 9 months. Luffy admitted quietly. What did I tell you about prioritizing hockey training, you brats? Garp's fist came down, and all three boys narrowly dodged. But Gigi, we need to control our powers. Luffy protested, dancing away from another swing. Yeah, I kept setting things on fire in my sleep. Ace added. And my steam was giving away our position to bandits, Sabo chimed in. Garp took a deep breath, visibly trying to calm himself. When he spoke again, his voice was controlled but intense. Tell me this, then. What happens when someone slaps seastone cuffs on you? The silence that followed was deafening. All three boys paled, with Luffy's face particularly ashen as he remembered Shanks' warnings about the same thing. Tell me. Garp demanded. Nothing, Luffy mumbled. Speak up. Nothing. We wouldn't be able to do anything. Luffy's voice cracked slightly. Exactly. Garp's voice softened marginally. Listen well, because I'm only saying this once. Gold Roger, the Pirate King himself, never had a devil fruit power. What? All three boys exclaimed in unison. That's right, Garp continued, actually smiling slightly at their shock. The strongest man I ever fought relied on his hockey and his natural strength. Devil fruits are tools, not crutches. But you gave us, Ace started. I gave you those fruits because power is power, Garp cut him off. But power without foundation is worthless. That's why I was angry when Luffy ate his fruit so young. However, his voice rose again, making them jump. That's in the past. From now on, we focus on hockey until I say otherwise. Yes, sir. They responded automatically. Good. Now, a familiar glint appeared in Garp's eyes. Let's see how your observation hockey handles this. Before they could blink, Garp had grabbed a handful of rocks and was pelting them with terrifying accuracy. Dodge. Ace yelped, barely avoiding a stone to the head. Focus on sensing the projectiles. Garp called out cheerfully. No devil fruit powers allowed. But Gigi, Luffy started to protest. No buts. And if I see one spark of lightning, one wisp of steam, or one flicker of flame, we double the training time. You're enjoying this way too much. Sabo accused, ducking under a particularly fast stone. Biwahaha. Of course I am. Nothing brings a marine hero more joy than proper training. Now, let's work on your armament hockey next. The sound of rocks hitting flesh and pained yelps echoed through the forest, punctuated by Garp's booming laughter and occasional shouts of, focus. And, feel the hockey flow. I'm starting to think, Ace muttered between dodges, that maybe we should have kept training hockey after all. You think? His brothers responded in unison, right before all three had to dive away from Garp's newest barrage. Less talking, more sensing. Garp called out. We've got months of slack to make up for. The three brothers shared a look of resigned determination. It was going to be a very long day. Years later. A storm sets sail. The dawn-painted fuchsia village in gentle hues of gold as villagers gathered at the docks. The sleepy town had seen many changes over the years, but none quite as significant as this moment. Their troublemaker, their whirlwind of chaos and laughter, was finally spreading his wings. Luffy stood tall at the dock, cutting a different figure from the child who once chased after Shanks. At 6 feet, he had grown into his own, his red cardigan fluttering in the morning breeze, the legendary straw hat sitting proudly atop his head. His build was leaner than his brother's, but there was an unmistakable strength in his stance. Take care, Luffy. Makino called out, her eyes glistening with unshed tears even as she smiled. He'll be the death of our reputation, Whoopslap grumbled, but even he couldn't completely hide the fondness in his voice. Just like those brothers of his, someone in the crowd muttered. Luffy's small boat barely seemed adequate for such grand dreams, but his grin was wide enough to split the sky. As he pushed off from the dock, he turned back one last time, raising his hand in a gesture that spoke of both farewell and promise. Luffy reclined in his boat, spinning his treasured hat on one finger. Perfect weather for the start of an adventure. A disturbance in the water caught his attention, bubbles rising from the depths, growing larger and more frequent. The Lord of the Coast, the same Sea King that had once cost Shanks his arm, emerged from the waves with a roar that sent birds scattering from nearby cliffs. Luffy's grin never wavered. Oh, you came to see me off too. The air crackled with sudden energy as dark clouds gathered overhead, appearing as if summoned by Luffy's will. Lightning danced between the clouds, reflecting in Luffy's eyes as he raised his hand, electricity arcing between his fingers. You know, he addressed the Sea King conversationally, I'm not that same weak kid anymore. The lightning that struck from above was precise and devastating, a focused bolt of nature's fury that lit up the morning sky. The Sea King didn't even have time to roar before it sank beneath the waves, leaving only spreading ripples in its wake. Standing in his boat, Luffy placed his hat firmly on his head, his voice carrying across the water with unshakable conviction. Ace, Sabo, Makino, Shanks. Watch me. I'm going to become the king of the pirates. The wind picked up, catching his sail. Behind him, Fuchsia village grew smaller, but the dark clouds lingered, nature's own farewell banner for the boy who could command storms. A few villagers swore they could hear Makino whisper, the sea's getting another dangerous one, as she wiped away a tear and turned back toward her bar. As Luffy's boat disappeared over the horizon, the clouds gradually dispersed, leaving behind clear skies and calm seas, the calm before the storm that would soon shake the whole world. A high-class passenger vessel was making its way along its course. Marines guarded the deck, the captain mingled in the truly fantastic ballroom built into the ship, and the upper crust of the East Blue laughed, danced, and ate tiny tidbits. It was a calm day, with barely a cloud in the sky and the tides docile for a change. It was a perfect day for napping and having fun. Two Marines were hanging by the guardrail, chatting away, when they noticed a barrel floating in the ocean. That caught their attention. Oi! There's a wine barrel in the water. One of them said. It's probably wreckage from whatever poor soul went through that whirlpool. Ah, well. Won't do him any good now. Let's haul it up. The other one said. So saying, the two cast out a line and hauled the barrel up to the deck with a bit of effort. Ooh, it's pretty heavy. There must be a lot. The two were grinning at their good fortune to be able to wet their throats. Their smiles withered and died the instant the call came from the crow's nest, and the sound of cannon fire came from across the water. Pirates. I see pirates. It's the Alvita pirates. Every Marine on the deck instantly broke out into action, their training taking over as Alvita's bombardment continued. The barrel was knocked askew in confusion and rolled away towards the lower decks. It was barely noticed by the Marines, whose efforts were for naught. They'd been ambushed, and the pirate ship pulled up alongside them in a matter of seconds. On the pirate ship's deck, a truly hideous woman stood at the forefront. She was the size of small whales, had freckles in all the wrong places, with flat, black hair covered by a cowboy hat and beady eyes. She held an iron mace almost as big as her as a staff, with her crew arrayed around her. This was Iron Club, Alvita, the woman worth 5 million belly. Men, who's the fairest on all the seas? Alvita asked. Her crew let out a full, if insincere, yell of, Alvita-sama. The woman grinned, revealing slightly yellow teeth, before yelling, charge. In a flurry of motion, the crew leapt over onto the other vessel to raid, pillage, plunder, and otherwise pilfer their Weasley black guts out. Alvita stayed behind and surveyed the damage before noticing a quivering little boy still on the ship. He had glasses and light pink hair. Kobe. She yelled, instantly getting a frightened reaction from the boy. Get over there now. Or face the club. With a menacing snarl, Alvita prepared to swing Kobe over to the other boat like he was a golf ball with her club. The boy broke out in frantic gibbers going far too fast to understand as human speech and threw himself over to the other ship. He quickly made his way to the relative peace of the lower decks. Phew. That was close. Now, I got to do something, or Alvita will kill me. Kobe, rather meekly, started to look around for something he could actually lift and could count as swag. This looks like a pantry. Kobe surveyed the room, before noticing a large wine barrel lying on its side. That looks interesting. Maybe Alvita will be okay with that. The boy set himself to the task of moving the barrel, but it proved futile as his weak limbs failed to move it an inch. It won't move. Maybe I should just go away and find something else. Kobe was just about to leave when 3 of the crew walked in. Kobe. What are you doing here, and with that barrel? Kobe went into his panic mode, but managed to stammer out, TTT there WW was this BB barrel, SS so I thought that maybe I should BB bring it up. The 3 men noticed the barrel, and what it contained, and got greedy little grins on their faces. Despite Kobe's weak protests, the 3 set the barrel upright and prepared to open it and guzzle away. Just as they were about to descend on the wine, the top blew outward as a young man with black hair, tan skin, a red vest, blue shorts, and a straw hat burst out of the barrel, his fist stretching out to hit the flunky nearest him, his eyes closed in pleasure. What a great nap! The mystery man yelled, seemingly unaware that he'd just knocked a pirate unconscious. Alvita's crew members couldn't have been more surprised if Alvita had shown up 200 pounds lighter whilst performing the can-can. The man opened his eyes, and then stared at the unconscious pirate at his feet confusedly. What's this guy taking a nap for? He'll catch a cold. Laws of the universe bent, anatomical features shifted, and suddenly the 2 conscious pirates had pure white eyes, larger heads, and shark's teeth. It's your fault, dumbass. They yelled, their instincts to public displays of idiocy kicking in. The mystery man paid them no heed, climbing out of the barrel and turning to Kobe. I'm hungry. Do you know where there's food? He asked, acting as if he had not burst out of a barrel and clobbered a pirate without conscious effort. The veins in the pirates' foreheads showed, and they drew their swords and charged. Kobe squealed in fear and cowered, while the man slowly turned his head to face the onslaught. The swords were raised, battle cries were yelled. And the top halves of both swords snapped off and flew towards the ceiling as the stranger gave a swipe of his hand. The pirates' eyes widened in awe as the man before them snapped steel with a flick of the wrist. The man stared at them with slight annoyance. What are you doing, playing with these things? They're sharp. Someone could get hurt. The men stood gaping for a second, before turning tail and running while dragging their unconscious nakama. The stranger scratched his head. What was with them? Ah, well, it doesn't matter. The stranger turned to face Kobe again. So, can you show me where the food is now? Kobe was wide-eyed as he looked up at the man. Who are you? He asked, wondering who on all the seas could be so strong as to break metal without effort. The man gave a wide grin and said, I'm Monkey D. Luffy. Nice to meet you. Luffy paused for a second, before opening the nearest door after smelling the air like a hound. Mushi. He yelled in wild joy, before descending like a piranha among the crates of food in the tiny box of a room. Kobe went into the room and closed the door behind him. I hope they don't find me in here, Kobe muttered to himself, before turning to look at the most interesting thing he'd seen in his short life. A man that had appeared from nowhere, displayed incredible strength, hopping up and down like a kid on Christmas morning while he practically inhaled every scrap of food his hands came in contact with. Kobe felt certain that the human stomach couldn't hold that much food, but he refrained from saying so. Luffy-san. Kobe tentatively asked, drawing Luffy's attention away from a crate of apples. I don't mean to be rude, but where did you come from? Luffy grinned, displaying the numerous chunks of food caught in his teeth. I was sailing near my village with my pet when that big whirlpool came by. It really took me by surprise. But, I managed to get in that barrel, and I decided to take a nap. When I woke up, I was here. Kobe's eyes widened as Luffy nonchalantly discussed surviving a whirlpool as if it were no big deal. Kobe chuckled nervously, before gathering his courage. Luffy-san, you have to leave here. This ship is being raided by the fearsome Alvita-sama. Since you hit her guy, you'll get the iron mace. You really need to get out of here. Luffy's eyebrows went up, pausing in his chewing. A pirate ship. Does that mean you're a pirate? Kobe blanched, before frantically shaking his head. No, not at all. Well, kinda, I guess. It's complicated. 2 years ago, I went onto a boat with the intention to fish, only to discover it was a boat taking pirates back to their ship. Here, Kobe shivered in remembered fear. They forced me to work for them, threatening me with the iron club. Still, I don't want to see Luffy-san hurt. I just met you, but I wouldn't wish the club on anyone. You've gotta escape. Luffy shrugged in a total lack of concern. Even so, I'm still hungry. Besides, I can just beat up this Alvita person if she gets in the way. Kobe's eyes reached dinner plate size, before near-reflexive mutterings of, impossible, came out of his mouth. Luffy knocked Kobe on the head, knocking him out of it. What's the big deal? I'm strong, and besides, I can't die here. I haven't become the Pirate King yet. Kobe gaped in shock. Pirate King. Then, Luffy-san is a pirate. Luffy nodded, still chewing on the food. Impossible. The Pirate King is a man with wealth, fame, and power, everything in this world united in one man. The last king, Gold Roger, was the only man to conquer the Grand Line. Impossible, impossible, impossible. Luffy-san will surely die if he tries to become the Pirate King. Luffy stopped eating here, his eyes becoming shaded by his straw hat as he stood up. It's not about whether or not I can do it, Luffy said quietly, drawing Kobe's attention. Luffy plucked the straw hat off his head, looking at it and reliving the memories that went with it. I promised the man that gave me this hat that I would gather a crew and become a great pirate. It's my dream to be the Pirate King, and I'm committed to my dream. I don't care if I die pursuing it. Kobe was shocked into silence by the raw determination behind the statement. Kobe could see that Luffy truly would die chasing his dream. Luffy grinned suddenly, breaking the somber mood, putting the hat back on his head. Ah, well. Now I've gotta find a ship. Maybe the pirates will give me one. If they're good people. Luffy started for the door, brushing past Kobe. Said boy was in the midst of an emotional crossroads. My life. Or my dream. Can it be that simple? Kobe recalled the 2 years of work and fear, breeding in him the desire to just stand aside and let others have their way. That impulse was suddenly being chalked by Kobe's childhood dream to be a Marine. Kobe took the deepest breath of his life, before standing up. Luffy-san, Kobe said, making Luffy pause. We've only just met, but you've inspired me. Kobe looked up, and a new light was shining in his eyes. You've given me courage. I'll run away from Alvita and become a Marine. It's my dream to catch bad guys. Kobe was on a roll now, making his way towards the door with Luffy. I'll leave Alvita. No, I'll catch Alvita. Whatever Kobe was going to say next withered and died as the roof of the room exploded, leaving wood, metal, and a seriously pissed off pirate mistress with a big ass club to fall to the ground. Kobe's heart practically gave out, while Luffy turned to watch this interesting development. Who are you going to catch? Kobe. Alvita's beady eyes turned up to glare at the pink-haired boy, who was suddenly a gibbering wreck. Alvita raised her gaze to look at Luffy. So, you're the guy who knocked out my man. You're not that bounty hunter Roronoa. Who are you? Luffy didn't as much as blink at the dramatic entrance. A pirate, he said, internally wondering who the hell this person was. Alvita grunted, before returning her gaze to Kobe. Kobe, who's the fairest on all the seas? Kobe jerked before stumbling through, TTT that O of CCC courses AA Alvita SSS, before he was interrupted. Definitely not you, Luffy said with an uncaring tone. While the only woman Luffy had seen in his life were Makino and Dayton, he knew calling this whale ugly would be an insult to the actual ugly people. Everyone in hearing distance froze, their eyes going wide and their jaws unhinging as they processed the suicidal comment. Alvita's forehead became a tapestry of tick marks, before bellowing in rage, die. With a minor effort, the obese woman brought down the solid ton of steel down on the spot Luffy had occupied, keyword being, had. Luffy, as nimble as his namesake, jumped out of the way, grabbed Kobe, and hopped up onto the deck, all the while smiling like an idiot. Kobe screamed in unadulterated fear, before he was dropped onto a spot of deck a bit behind where Luffy landed. Stay there or you'll get in the way. Luffy said, his smile softening the words a little, before turning to face the Alvita pirate crew, who were still in a semi-state of shock. Who's first? Luffy asked, cracking his knuckles in anticipation. The crew seemed to gird itself, before a few of them surged forward with a battle cry. Luffy grinned, before implanting his fist in the first one's skull, jumped to avoid the swipe from the second before giving a punishing headbutt, before finally giving a kick to the guy that crept up behind him. All three men went down without as much as a sound. Luffy grinned and crossed his arms. Is that all you got? He asked, as if the whole affair were good fun. The entirety of the crew stared in awe and fear at the effortless defeat of their nakama, while one lone swordsman climbed the deck behind Luffy. With a cry, the man leapt and made to slash Luffy in half. Luffy turned to look at the assailant, before frowning. What happened next left the crew speechless with confusion. In the moments before the blade hit home, Luffy glared at his attacker. The next thing anyone knew, the man was unconscious on the ground in front of Luffy, his sword still in hand. Luffy glared with disapproval at his would-be assassin. Didn't anyone ever tell you that attacking from behind isn't fair? The crew stared for a few more seconds, before adrenaline and mob psychology kicked in and they charged Luffy as a massive horde. Luffy proceeded to run across the deck with a comic expression of fear on his face. It's unfair to attack with more people too. The chase proceeded across the deck, somehow avoiding Kobe. Luffy grinned before his expression turned to dead serious. The sword were about to touch his skin, when everyone close to him suddenly got electrocuted. Kobe gasped at the white lightning being generated by the man's body. One by one fell in the floor, smoke coming out of their mouth, their eyes completely white. Kobe wasn't sure if they were actually still alive. Just as Alvita managed to reach the deck, her entire crew laid unconscious across the deck. Kobe stared in shock at Luffy. Luffy grinned and said, I'm strong, remember? Alvita narrowed her eyes. So, you have the power of the devil's fruit. I thought it was just a legend. Luffy grinned, before pulling out his right finger, turning it to lightning, while the second finger was soaking wet out of nowhere. I'm a storm person, Luffy proclaimed proudly. Alvita grimaced, before charging forward with her massive mace held above her head. Don't take me so lightly. She yelled in fury, bringing her mace down on Luffy's head. Luffy stayed in his exact same position before a smile spread across his face. Luffy glared up at Alvita, who was sufficiently freaked out that the man's skull hadn't cracked. I don't the power of my devil fruit to survive this so-called attack. Suddenly, out of nowhere, an unseen force seemed to ram into Alvita, knocking her back across the deck. Kobe stared in disbelief as he saw the most terrifying, and heaviest person he'd ever known getting thrown ass over teakettle. Luffy merely grinned before he raised up his fist. Kobe's eyes almost popped out at seeing something covering the entire arm. It looked like a concentrated air, barely visible, but Kobe could still see it. Just as Alvita stood up, looking as if she'd just hopped off a roller coaster, Luffy brought his fist forward in a truly terrific punch as he yelled, Air Fist. The fist impacted, and Alvita was blown away into the distance until she was nothing more than a star on the horizon. Luffy turned to glare at the stragglers on Alvita's ship, who were by now ready to shit their pants. Oi! Get a boat ready for Kobe. He needs to join the Marines. The men on the ship started bustling like a nest of bees, preparing a small dinghy for Kobe's and Luffy's use. Kobe turned to stare at Luffy, his mind unable to comprehend what had just happened. Luffy just shrugged. What? No enemy can stand up to a king. With that oddly philosophical remark, Luffy made to grab Kobe and hop into the waiting boat. However, before that, the sound of cannons suddenly roared like thunder. The Marines had arrived. Kobe looked at the Marine ship with hope. You can't join right now. They will think you're some kind of spy, Luffy stated, knowing Kobe probably wanted to join the Marines. Kobe just murmured, I know. Luffy shrugged before grabbing Kobe and hopping into the boat. Falling in the middle of a boat, they both heard a scream. Luffy saw the orange hair of a girl. What the hell? She screamed, terrified of two people suddenly jumping in the middle of her boat. Luffy noticed the treasure on her boat and was about to ask what was her name when more cannonballs hit near their boat. The girl got in a shocking state and looked ready to try and somehow sail to safety as soon as possible. These idiots are throwing cannonballs so close to a civilian boat, he shouted in anger before another cannonball was headed straight to them. The girl screamed in panic. Kobe closed his eyes, awaiting their inevitable demise. Luffy just grinned before catching the cannon as if it was a ball. This caused the girl's eyes to almost pop out, while Kobe took a peek to see how they were still breathing, only to see Luffy holding the ball in his hand as if were a mere toy to play. You can have this back, Luffy shouted at the Marine ship before throwing at them, causing a big chunk of the ship to explode. Kobe had his mouth wide open, still trying to comprehend what had just happened. While the girl looked somehow relieved, Luffy noticed the way she was looking at him. Luffy sat down before raising an eyebrow at their shocked faces. What is it? He asked as if he didn't just catch a cannonball. What do you mean, what is it? Did you not see what you just did? How did you even do it? The girl screamed with sharp teeth which were quite intimidating for Kobe, but Luffy just laughed. Shishishi, before he put half of his hand on the water, the girl was about to ask what he wanted to do now when their boat suddenly started moving much faster forward. The girl lost balance. She almost fell in the water, but Luffy grabbed her shirt, making sure she didn't fall. Kobe, on the other hand, hit his face at the side of the boat. The girl grabbed the boat tightly, making sure she wouldn't fall, before her eyes saw the boy doing something with his right hand, causing the water to move fast around his hand. She was about to ask how he could do this. I can control the water a bit. I'm adding force to my hand causing this speed, Luffy explained as best as he could. The girl didn't bother to ask more but was quite impressed by his power. Only now did she notice his well-built muscles, but her eyes found his eyes. Now being used to the new speed of the boat, she stopped holding the side of the boat and decided to ask. Who are you? That was quite impressive, she spoke with a warmer tone. The pink boy was rubbing the side of his head, still hurting. I'm Luffy, this one here is Kobe, he introduced himself, putting a hand on his Kobe's shoulder when he mentioned his name. I'm Nami, it is good to meet you, Name introduced herself, smiling. How did you do that with the cannonball? Nami asked, wondering if someone like him would perhaps want to work with her. At this, Luffy laughed slightly. My grandpa used to throw cannonballs at me since I was 9 years old. To get stronger he always said, he said as if remembering a pleasant memory while Kobe and Nami were looking at Luffy with wide open mouth. They couldn't comprehend someone throwing cannonballs at a child. That child being his grandson on top of that. After getting over the fact that perhaps his grandpa was a madman. Do you want to join me? I'm a thief who steals from pirates, Nami suggested, leaning slightly forward, showing a bit of her cleavage. Luffy didn't even bat an eye on her chest. No, thank you, he simply said. Nami pouted, clearly disappointed that someone like him didn't want to join. Come on, it will be fun. What are you even doing out in the sea anyway? Nami asked curiously, leaning back against the dinghy. Don't say it, just don't be an idiot, Kobe prayed with closed eyes. Luffy grinned even more before standing up, both his hands raised. I'm going to become the Pirate King, he shouted proudly before sitting down. Only now Luffy noticed that Nami's face changed to that of disgust, rage and even hatred. So you're a pirate scum, she spat the word with venom. Kobe was taken aback by her sudden change of tone while Luffy stood silent at her sudden rant. I should have known. I should throw you at the bottom of the sea where you all belong, she spat the words with anger, her eyes burning with rage. Not everyone is like that, Luffy suddenly said, his eyes hidden behind the hat. Nami looked confused for a moment by his words before asking. What do you mean? She didn't get to finish before Luffy looked at her again. Not all pirates are like the ones who hurt you. A pirate is someone who travels the world with his nakama, people who are free, enjoy their life to the fullest and help people who need help. Luffy spoke with a serious tone, his right eye covered by the hat, looked covered in darkness. Kobe hadn't heard Luffy speak with that tone before and couldn't help but look at Luffy with awe and respect. Nami bit her lower lip, ready to shout at him that he was a liar and that no pirates were like that, but instead, she kept quiet. Whatever, she simply said, and turning her head around and looking at the horizon, refusing to look at them. Luffy hoped to show her that not all pirates were shitty people. Deciding to not push for an answer, Luffy turned his attention to Kobe. Luffy, back at the ship, you told Alvita that you didn't need your devil fruit powers to avoid her attack. What did you mean? That's called haki. I have an extraordinary kind of haki, called the King's Disposition, or Haoshoku haki. It's much more powerful and can do a lot more things than normal haki. I've been working on it for 10 years, experimenting and mastering it. I can do everything from knock people out to make my fist strong enough to tear through steel, to make animals understand me. I can even make some things move at a distance. Let me tell you, it's really changed what kind of person I am. Luffy went on and explained what the other two hockey types were. Nami silently listened but didn't react to what Luffy said to Kobe. You said you find out about Conker's hockey at a young age. How? Kobe asked, interested. Years ago. Luffy was alone in the jungle. As far as scary situations went, it was a biggie. Just a young boy, he'd been left stranded alone with no food, no water, a tiny knife, and the instruction from his quasi-sadistic grandpa to survive brat. Luffy was just a little kid. Like any other kid, he was afraid of some basic things, like the dark, or animals, or the prospect of no meals to fill his stomach. And his grandpa had left him out, quite literally, for the wolves. Crazy Gramps, Luffy muttered, trying to distract himself with the sound of his own voice. He leaves me in the craziest places, makes me do the craziest things, and for what? So I can be a good Marine. I don't want to be a Marine. I want to be a pirate, dang it. Not just a pirate, but the Pirate King. I want to find One Piece. And he just laughs in my face and tells me to shut up and go survive already. Luffy wasn't a crybaby, but he sure as hell felt scared. He hated it when his grandpa dumped him in the middle of nowhere because it meant he had to find his own food, his own water, and contend with the predators of the region. He was just a kid, damn it. Still, a small voice in Luffy's head said, his neglected sense of good reason. What grandpa does to you does make you stronger. You're not even 7, but you already know how to fight animals, build a shelter, and find clean water. Some adults can't do that. Oh, shut up, Luffy said to himself, unwilling to admit that what Gramps put him through actually helped him in some way. Such thoughts were quickly forgotten, however, when a loud growl washed over Luffy. He froze, felt his heart go double time, and turned to face a gigantic, hungry-looking wolf with sickly-colored fur and teeth. There wasn't any flashes of his short life, no broken record recording in his thoughts. Luffy didn't even have to think. His body did it for him. He ran. He ran as fast as his little legs could carry him and then ran faster. He ducked, swerved, turned, and officially did everything humanly possible to try and outrun or outsmart the wolf that had given chase. It wasn't enough. Luffy felt a sharp impact between his shoulder blades, and suddenly he was face down in the mud as something truly massive with bad breath held him down, a crushing weight on his small back. At that moment, something broke inside Luffy. The dam built from adrenaline and physical effort that had prevented panic cracked, and suddenly Luffy was filled with mind-numbing fear. True terror seared his veins as a deep-seated, primal fear, the fear of being eaten rose up in Luffy like a riptide and dragged him away from the calm shores of sanity into the turbulent waters of hysteria. He was a kid, and he didn't want to die. Luffy felt teeth circle his throat and could practically feel the shifts in muscle in the giant body above him that indicated the quick jerk of the head that would break his neck like a twig. All of Luffy's fear and pain and weariness coalesced into a single point as he screamed out in a voice he only barely recognized as his own, "Stop." As he did, a wave of unseen force exploded out of Luffy, tearing the leaves from branches 20 feet away. The wolf tensed before collapsing into a heap, its eyes rolled back into its head. Luffy blinked and then sat up. He was alive, and the wolf had collapsed. What had happened? Now. Kobe heard what Luffy said and seriously wondered if his grandfather had actually thought to kill Luffy, while Nami somehow felt bad that Luffy had that kind of grandpa. Hey, Luffy asked Kobe. Who was that Roronoa guy Alvita was talking about? Kobe blinked before going pale as a sheet. Roronoa Zoro, the pirate hunter. They say that he's like a demon in a human's flesh. He goes around thirsting for blood, living only for the bounty. He is the terror of the East Blue's pirates. I hear that the Marines locked him up somewhere. Kobe chuckled before wondering aloud, why do you ask? Luffy grinned in such a way that Kobe suddenly felt afraid of the answer. I thought I might make him part of my crew. If he's a good person. Kobe gaped before sputtering, impossible, impossible. He's been locked up because he's a bad guy. You're a pirate, he's a pirate hunter. He'd kill you. Why would he become a pirate anyway? Impossible, impossible, impossible. Kobe was abruptly bonked, lightly, on the head by Luffy. Why'd you hit me? Kobe asked, nursing the knock on his noggin. Just because. Luffy said, laughing without a care in the world, as the three sailed through the East Blue.